superstructures. Though often the last section we create in our builds, the superstructure is the make or break point in getting our ships to look perfect. For some reason, many of us can't put into words what makes this section look right, yet at the same time, it's not hard to tell when we are doing something wrong. So today, let's pull out our magnifying glasses and get some ideas as to what really gives a superstructure its shape. If you're going to get the look you want in your superstructure, then we need to step back for a second and talk about visual balancing. Every ship is defined by its usage of 3 sections: the hull, the armament, and its superstructure. While each of these can look amazing on their own, they all need to share a similar visual style to fit together. I can't just put my battleship guns on my ocean liner. This is certainly an extreme example, but the reasoning is the hull and superstructure are very bulky in design, and their style goes far to emphasize elegance and visibility over practicality. Our gun turret is quite the opposite. Any of the looks we enjoy in it come directly from its pure emphasis on practicality. When you look at it, you can almost feel how it functions. So make sure your design languages line up, because they will go the farthest to define how your super should look. While I will talk extensively about the practical components which make up a superstructure, always keep in mind that you have an extensive amount of say in the style your super takes on. And I mean that to the fullest extent. Yours can be just a hump in the hull, or even deliberately none at all. Keep in mind that as I go forward, there are exceptions to every tip of advice I am going to give you, so never be afraid to diverge from the beaten path and make what speaks to you. If you are yet to lay down any of your guns yet, think about the proportions you want. If you're not sure what you want, a good rule of thumb I've heard is to shoot to have the superstructure be around 1/3 to half of the vessel's length. Once we start laying it down, we want to keep in mind our firing arcs, or in other terms, the max angle which our turrets can rotate to. The more important a turret is on your vessel, then the larger its firing arc should be. In this picture, each turret's firing arc is its green semicircle which surrounds it. Unless you're making a monitor, your superstructure will inevitably get in the way of your main cannon's angle of fire. So when designing your super, you need to be cognizant of how intrusive it is. Here's a real-world example of how designers approach this problem. You could see that the rear section of the superstructure is angled forward on both sides, meaning this rear turret had only a 70-degree or so dead zone. And on a slight tangent, when the turret is aimed to the fullest extent, it is called firing over the shoulder, since it is pointed effectively in the opposite angle of its resting position. The same concept is definitely applicable to your secondaries and tertiaries too. 2 guns that can only see 90 degrees each are only about as effective as a single gun that can slew 180 degrees. Now, the battleship I've been showing off certainly has quite the weapons arrangement. I originally designed it for a tournament in Ultimate Admiral. As you can easily tell, the goal was to fit as many main guns as I could on the design. With a more conventional placement, I'd only ever have 6 turrets firing at a single enemy. But to fit 2 more in per side, I raised the middle 2 up, allowing for them to fire over the outside ones I added. Sideways super firing is common on many warships, but this one certainly looks unique because I did it with my primary guns rather than the secondaries. Because of this, my superstructure has been split into 2 sections to maintain balance. At the very least, our weapon placement has now given us a good idea of what the base of our superstructure should look like. Let's go take a look at the bridge section next. It goes without saying that the bridge is almost always in a spot with some decent elevation overlooking the bow of the vessel. I mean, the ship is going forward 99.9% of the time, so yeah, of course it is. The bridge is every bit the eyes of the vessel, as it is the brain, which means that it has to strike an awkward balance between visibility and protection. On certain warships, namely heavier ones, these roles will be split in 2. An armored conning tower will keep the vital steering gear protected through a battle, with the crew inside only being able to see through thin slits and periscopes. A foul weather bridge allows for a much more open yet vulnerable vantage point while outside of conflict. In most cases though, there will just be one. Your bridge windows are one of the focal points of your design, so make sure they have some character, be it through highlighting individual window panes, we're angling the window entirely. The next thing we're going to cover is ventilation. The obvious feature that comes to mind here is smokestacks. We're often used to looking at these just from the outside, but let's see a cutaway to reveal the labyrinth of pipes which outgasses our engines and boilers. This is the reason that you'll usually see a funnel positioned in the center of the ship. On some ships, we can even see that the stacks start to flare out at the base, and some still are completely defined by their unique uptake layout. Many of you probably aren't looking to think that deeply about your vessels, so here's some more direct advice. I see a lot of people go for a fairly circular stack like this, or even this one. This isn't by any means wrong, but because it's so common for new players to do, it lacks any unique identity. So try lengthening a bit to see how that looks. Another thing to be mindful of is if we're off-gassing bad stuff out of our funnel, then we need to be constantly replacing it with the good stuff. If we don't, anyone who works inside the ship is going to be having a very bad time. In the olden days, ships like the Lusitania needed a massive amount of standalone ducts to scoop up as much air as possible. But designers found ways to maintain air intake while still being subtle. The first place to look for intake is around the funnels themselves. Especially on warships where space was not a commodity, reusing the funnel uptakes to intake air is the obvious choice. You'll largely see these intake grates around the base, but you still might see ventilation in other areas too. These circular things which litter the deck of American warships also provide ventilation. Crew accessibility is another factor to consider. Catwalks certainly can add a lot of character. If you have a component on your superstructure that you can imagine the crew needing to get to, that's where a catwalk should go. If you're going for an older look, think about spotted platforms here too. While internal stairs are fairly common, nearly all ships I've seen also possess some capacity of external access in stairs or ladders. The former might be quite the thoroughfare, so having each segment be close together is preferable. If we don't, our superstructure might pose as a vertical maze for our crew in a pressing situation. If you're going for a stealth design, avoid perfect 90-degree angles. When it comes to radar, the sides of your ship are going to kind of work like a mirror. If you have any sides that are adjacent to each other, the radar waves can bounce off one, off the next, and then back at the sender, thus giving away your location to that radar. The same goes for any complex areas that could catch the radar signal. Here's a gaping flaw in my ship. All of these missile tubes create an area where the radar signals can bounce around a lot, and some of them will ultimately be sent back the way they came. Because of this, abiding by a true stealth mentality does make external access a lot harder to plan. Ultimately, the physical deck layouts all come down to the logic in how your vessel operates. In any of these games, we rarely ever see crew, nor do we as the player ever fully fill their shoes. But the aesthetic of your vessel can go very far in describing how it works without telling us outright. Especially if you are a warship, the ability to hone in on your enemy is just as important as it was for your dad to hone in on your mother. Your detection components, be it a massive radar, some guys with binoculars, or anything in between, tend to benefit from being as high up on your vessel as possible. This might surprise you, but the Earth is round. If we were standing on a beach at water's edge, we could see about 3 kilometers. But if we give our vessel a sizable mast, that distance expands to nearly 25 kilometers. So it's not hard to see why we put all this valuable detection equipment so high up. It's fairly common that a ship will have 2 masts, one in the front of the funnel and one at the rear of the superstructure. Just make sure the aft one doesn't get screwed up by the smoke when you're moving. The British learned this one the hard way with HMS Dreadnought. Let's wrap this all up with one last section, and this time we're going to step away from ships for a second. There was a lot I could cover here. I've deleted at least 3 segments from the script. They were way too in-depth for a surface level tutorial like this. And believe it or not, that's fine, because the real objective with this tutorial is to help enable your inquisitive mindset. while I love doing it, you don't need me to keep nerding out about pictures with you. A world of reference material is at your fingertips. So get out there and look up pictures, drawings, and concept art of whatever is inspiring you. You know enough to break down those images and see what's making them work, and then manipulate it to make it your own style. If you're still struggling, come and join us over in the United Builders Discord. We'll love to see what you're working on and give you constructive advice on how to get what you're looking for. And no, that doesn't mean I'll stop with these tutorials anytime soon. So I do plan to keep doing it, and misallocation too, because I'm not going to stop doing misallocation. Even if none of you show up, I'm gonna keep fucking doing this series until I die! Oh, and to those of you who are returning viewers to this channel, thank you so much for your support. Prior to the last tutorial I put out, I really didn't have any major plans for this channel outside of misallocation. The fact that you're really putting my work on the map with your support, I can't put into words what that means to me. So, I guess I'll be seeing some of you guys around, and I hope you all have a lovely day.